and welcome to Trans Experience LA. Today we are very fortunate to be at Cal State Northridge, the location of the 8th Annual Transgender Leadership Summit. And we have the great honor of sitting down today with Masen Davis, who is not only the Executive Director of the Transgender Law Center, but has been a long-time activist in the community, both in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and has brought to fruition a lot of the foundation for the work that's being done now. So today we're going to talk to Masen Davis, get a little into his history, and move forward to where we're at today and what Masen's vision of the future is. So welcome, Masen. How are you?
Well, I'm great, Driana. It's so nice to be here and doing this with you.
How do you feel about the 8th Annual Transgender Leadership Summit? 8 years.
We've been doing this 8 years now, and I remember the first one at USC.
Yeah, I was there.
When we had 3 workshops going on at a time, and I just never imagined we'd be where we are today. I think that's really my feeling these days. I mean, we clearly have so much more work to do, but we have come so far. And we saw such an incredible group of folks this weekend, from every walk of life, and from youth to parents, to folks who've been advocating for well over 20 years, and those who just showed up for the first time, and people who are really hungry to be active and to make a difference in this community and in this world. And it gives me a lot of hope. We need more venues like it, right, where we can come together. I feel like we've got a good history generally in LA of meeting for support and community, and also leadership. I mean, I think about the first leadership council that was put together many years ago, and I'm glad that there's still this space that's being created to develop our leaders and support folks who want to get more active and involved in the community.
Oh, and so Masen, I want to know about, you mentioned how it's evolved and changed and taken on a life of its own. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be the person that you are today. What ignited this light to change the world, to make it better, to be an advocate for the trans community?
I wish I knew the answer to that.
That's an easy question, right?
It is, right? Like, why are you who you are? We are all, I think, a product of some of so many different events, both good and bad, throughout our lives that form who we are and how we see the world. And I've had a lot of struggles, especially in my early years, and that I think makes me really grateful for all that I've got today, and also fuels a sense of responsibility to make things easier for the next generation. I grew up in small town Missouri. I was born in 1971, and both my parents were very young and struggled a lot. Got divorced when I was young, and it was interesting. Both my family, both sides of my family have a lot of mental health issues that they struggle with, and so I grew up with that as a given, right? That there are folks that really struggle with mental health issues and needed some additional support to make it through at times. And that, in some ways, resulted in me growing up pretty quickly, because I had to be pretty self-sufficient at a young age. And growing up in Missouri, I knew I didn't want to stay in the Midwest forever. And I just somehow realized that education was going to be a way out for me. I started studying for the SAT when I was, I think, in the 4th grade.
Wow.
Because I knew that that would be a pathway out if I could get a good scholarship to college. So it's funny how life evolves and the things you remember when you think back. Now, I didn't know I was transgender at the time. We didn't use those words. We didn't even talk about gay people. My dad, when I was in junior high, made up a song called Gay Guys in Space, and I think that was the first time I'd heard the word gay.
Wow.
You have to know my dad to understand that. But we didn't have role models, right? There was no Ellen DeGeneres. There wasn't a transgender person who was visible or public at the time. All I knew was that I did not fit the expectations that people had for girls. And I knew that my family really wanted me to wear different clothes than I wanted to. And the one time I asked for a doll, I got multiple copies of that doll because everybody was so excited that I actually expressed interest in something that was feminine, or they deemed to be feminine. But I also remember as young as, well, kindergarten, being told I wasn't supposed to bring boys' toys to school. And my stepmom was a music school teacher in Pattonsburg, Missouri, population 501, which is where I went to kindergarten. And walking to school with her, and I would put the little green army guys, little plastic die cut, like hard plastic army guys, I put them in my shoes. And I would, because that was the only way I could think to hide them and take them to school. And I can still remember the feeling of the little guns poking into my feet as I would walk to school. It was kind of painful, and yet it was somehow really powerfully important for me to be able to express my identity in that way. I remember wearing the clothes that were approved by my family, but putting my t-shirt and jeans and backpack and walking halfway to school and changing clothes in the bushes into my jeans to go to second grade. Now, we didn't call that transgender, right? I mean, I knew I had been born female, but I also knew that that wasn't the end of the story for me. And it took many years before I had a sense of what that could mean. I heard that somebody was transgender, that there was this transgender guy when I was in college. And like a lot of folks, I came out as a lesbian at first. I thought that must be who I was. And then I heard about this guy, and I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating. When I moved to San Francisco from Chicago, where I had gone to college, and ran into him. And it was like the skies opened up, because for the first time I'd met a transgender man and I felt like I was looking at myself. And what was important to me, I think, in that moment, too, was seeing that he had a job, and that he seemed happy, and that he had friends and family around him. Because at the time, we just all assumed if you're transgender, you were crazy, you were going to be unemployed for life, you would be ostracized from society and totally on your own. And so for me, it took meeting one person, right, who had had a different experience, and I thought maybe I could do this. This might be who I am. So that really, for me, started my exploration specifically about myself as potentially a transgender person. It took another year or two, I think, before I made a decision to transition and figured out what that meant for me. And it was terrifying. I just felt like I was jumping off a cliff. I figured I would lose everything, but it was really important for me to do so. I just couldn't see myself in my own mind's eye as an older woman. I didn't see a future on some level. And
how did your family take your evolution?
It wasn't easy. I don't know that any family members has a kid and says, wow, I'm so excited, I hope they grow up to be trans. But
not yet, anyway.
Not yet, now
we're getting
right?
there.
All these parents that are so much more supportive than they were.
It's amazing.
It's neat. And I was 27 by the time I started testosterone, and I wasn't certain what it would be like. I didn't have a big support network of trans folk at the time, so I went on a low dose of testosterone for 9 months until I decided this was definitely the right thing for me. And that's when I told my parents. And I think my mom was mostly upset that I had not told her previously, that by the time I told her, it was a done deal. And it took us a while, about a year before we recovered from that. And after that, our relationship steadily improved. My dad has not been as supportive over years. I think he struggles with it. He would say it doesn't fit into his narrative and how he sees his life. And that's unfortunate. I hope that changes in time. My door's always open. But I have decided to spend my energy and time on people who want to spend their energy and time with me. So I don't think a lot about that at this point. It's something I hope he comes around to at some point as he gets older. But if he doesn't, that's okay. I am so blessed. And making the decision for me to transition was one of the best things I've ever done for myself.
And sometimes, I know for me what has been a lifesaver has been the family that I create, the community that embraces me as a family. And I think that's what you've been very successful at, creating this large family, not only for you, but for the entire community, and creating that space for us.
Extended family is really critical, right? And I mean, when I came out originally as a lesbian, I lost some family at the time, and that was tough. And I really lucked out because I ended up taking a gay and lesbian history course, and I learned about Harvey Milk and the early gay liberation movement, and that was in 1990. And that changed my life. I mean, within a month, I'd become a kind of gay and lesbian activist on campus, and that's what I did for years before I was trans.
Wow.
And then when I came out as transgender, I'm like, wow, I thought gay and lesbian and bisexual people had it hard. I had no idea. I mean, the stigma and the discrimination and the oppression, especially for some parts of our community, is just it's just dehumanizing. It's something we shouldn't allow at this point in our history.
Absolutely.
And I think if people realized how bad it is for so many folks, I'd have a hard time seeing how they couldn't stand up and act on that in some way. So when I came out as trans, I felt like I had to be active because we were invisible as trans guys, and yet we had to figure out how do we navigate families and healthcare and the other issues that all of us face when we're just trying to be ourselves and swimming upstream to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a lot of people don't know that the first FTM support group happened in LA many years ago, like probably 30 years ago at this point. And so LA's got a really good and deep history in trans activism generally, including FTM activism. I was really fortunate. I moved from San Francisco to LA in 1998. And so there were, in the 1990s, a series of FTM conferences. The first one happened, I believe, relatively early in the 1990s, and was organized by a group of trans guys, mostly involved with FTM International, which was a pretty robust network that had been set up originally by Lou Sullivan, and then later was coordinated by Jameson Green. And so I believe Forward Motion ended up being the third FTM-related conference that had happened in that period of time, which was really critical because before that, trans guys had been pretty disconnected, pretty invisible. Transgender meant transgender women. And so it was an opportunity for trans guys to finally get together and see areas of commonality, talk about issues that were specific to them, and to start talking about their role within a larger transgender movement as well. It was really critical, and it was a spectacular conference. I'm still in contact with some of the people who came from other countries and those that have stayed active. It was a really galvanizing time for many of us. And, I still think we owe so much to some of those early guys, and some of whom are still around, like Jacob Hale and Mike Hernandez and Sky Renfro and Daniel Gould and Justin Tanis and a few other folks who are a little quieter. It's amazing to see kind of beginning of community in many ways. And for LA, that was a big part, at least for me, of seeing us become more visible and organized as an FTM part of a broader trans community. So we ended up with some money left over, and we decided as an organizing committee that we would look at proposals for how to spend that money. And there were a couple of different proposals that we looked at that the steering committee members put forward. The one they ended up accepting was one that I did with Daniel Gould to propose to start a nonprofit that would specifically focus on community building in Los Angeles among trans guys. Because we felt like we'd done this international conference that drawn people from all over the world and the country, but we should invest it locally and build a local community as well. So we put that into starting a group, which we ended up naming FTM Alliance of Los Angeles, and started doing work under that name in 2000, I believe. It became incorporated, I think, as a nonprofit in 2002, if I remember correctly. And we did, our theory was to do support groups so that we could then get people into more social gatherings so that we could then politicize them and get them into organizing and action. And we ended up doing a lot of early work around healthcare access, inspired by the fact that many of us just didn't have a doctor to go to at all.
Oh, yeah.
There was one doctor who would take care of people, but you had to pay out of pocket, you'd have to wait for hours, and you just kept one person being the only person in LA County, right?
Oh, no.
It just didn't work. And I became really inspired personally because I was uninsured for a while before I went to graduate school at UCLA. and had been on disability. I'd been working before I came to LA in San Francisco for a labor union doing databases, and I had really bad carpal tunnel I developed when I was there. So when I first got to Los Angeles, I was uninsured and on disability for a bit. And I was out of testosterone, and I also had a horrible case of bronchitis.
Oh, no.
So I went to my local community clinic in Highland Park, right, in Northeast LA, and I told, filled out the form about what medications you're on. I said testosterone. So the guy came in and said, why are you on this? And I told him I'm transgender. And he says, well, I don't think I can take care of your bronchitis because I don't know anything about transgender people or caring for them. And so he sent me across town to go to another place. They turned me away as well. Went to another place that they finally treated me for bronchitis. You know what's amazing? It turns out bronchitis for trans people is the same as treating bronchitis for other people.
Okay. Surprisingly enough.
And I asked them, because somebody had said they serve trans people and they give hormones. I'm like, awesome. So I asked them for hormones, and they said they were, at the time, only doing that for trans women impacted by HIV. They at least gave me antibiotics for my chest and my bronchitis. But they said, listen, we have a case manager who's well connected and just went through a trans training, and so why don't you talk to her? And I did, and she's like, oh, I know somebody who's doing organizing in this area, and I'm sure they can help you. And she gave me my own business card. That's what it was like.
Oh my God, how funny.
That's what it was like in Los Angeles in like 2000.
Wow.
So it's one of the reasons we started doing a lot of healthcare organizing and education from FTM Alliance of LA. We developed a training. We went into a lot of the different healthcare clinics and did one-on-one trainings anywhere we could, and really focused in on healthcare providers, and got a grant from first the Liberty Hill Foundation for us to help start. That was our first grant. And then eventually got a small grant from the California Endowment to do some of the health-related work. So we were able to have a half-time staff person at least working on that. And it was just a delight. I went to grad school and did a lot of FTM Alliance work in my spare time, and then worked again.
So thank you, Masen, for sharing that bit of history, which I think many people in the community are not aware of. So I think that's just so incredibly valuable. And for me as well, I feel like I'm learning so much, and I'm so grateful for you to share that knowledge. And I want you to tell us a little bit about what you feel have been the bigger wins in our community. How have you seen our community evolve from the time where you were doing organizing, where there was no language, no services, nothing, to now where we are building up more of a robust community and services?
Well, it's been a really interesting evolution. I mean, I think it's always important to remember, like, so many people were involved in making all of the changes, right? I mean, even in the 80s, you had folks doing support groups, like Under Construction in Los Angeles, and we had Genderqueer Boys at one point that folks put together. Typically there are a few of us that get a lot of attention, but for every few people that people see, there are scores that did just as much and a lot of hard work to organize to make the changes possible, right? And I'm always so aware of that. Like, we've just got an incredibly robust group of folks who make stuff happen, which is spectacular. For me, some of the biggest changes have been around healthcare and our legal protections. Obviously, I think about that a lot now that I'm at Transgender Law Center. But when I came out as transgender in 97, 98, we really didn't have any legal protections, right? Yeah. And now we're sitting here in 2014, and we have an incredibly robust set of legal protections in California, from employment to housing to public accommodations to schools to insurance. We have changed the policy landscape in this state and increasingly around the country. Last year, so in 2013, we saw, actually end of 2012, we saw the Department of Insurance in California issue regulations that clarify what non-discrimination means in insurance for transgender people. The Department of Managed Healthcare that regulates HMOs in the state did that in 2013. Now, both of them are drawing on a bill that we helped pass in, I believe it was 2005, the Insurance Non-Discrimination Act, where we knew if we passed that law then, we could say, okay, insurance companies can't deny people the care that they're providing to non-trans people. And it was great to get that passed, but we didn't have the teeth to actually give that any power. And it took a few years to build up our political power and partnerships and allies in Sacramento to actually then put teeth into that law, which happened in 2012, 2013. So now we're actually getting, finally, people's transition-related care covered by their insurance companies. And in some situations, for example, Healthy San Francisco's local program, they're now creating a whole new surgical program for uninsured residents to get their care covered.
That's wonderful.
And Medi-Cal is covering medically necessary transition-related care.
So great.
So, I just this weekend was talking to people who, are in their 50s, who've always wanted to be able to medically transition, who, for the first time in their lives, now in 2014, as opposed to, 2008 when I couldn't get a doctor to even talk to me about bronchitis, 2014, we're hearing from transgender people who are finally getting the care covered that they need. People are getting their transition-related care covered, they're getting it scheduled, and they're getting the support that they need for it to be successful. Really wonderful.
Amazing.
And something that I didn't think was possible even 5 years ago. So change is really possible. I definitely see that. And also we've seen a big change in our identity documents, for example. The process for doing that has evolved over the years. A lot of people did advocacy early on in the 1970s for us in California to be able to change our gender legally. But that hadn't been updated for a long time. So in the last few years, we've done a few bills that we were able to pass to streamline that process, to end the mandated surgery requirement for people to change their gender, to create an alternate for people who can't go through the court system, to end the current practice where people have to publish their name change in a public newspaper for a few weeks, which is very costly and really infringes on privacy.
Yeah.
So I'm actually really proud that it's much easier now than it used to be to get an ID that actually reflects how we live our lives. We now have, I'd say, a majority of people in the state who should be covered and able to get their transition-related care paid for. And we're seeing changes in our employment system as groups, programs like TEEP go in and train corporations how to better support our folks. So we've got a long ways to go still. We still have high levels of unemployment and poverty, but we have the tools now to actually change the game for trans folks.
Absolutely. That's such amazing history right there. And I think that, for future generations who will grow up with hopefully none of these issues, it'll be really important for them to know all the work that was done and the struggles that existed before all of that changed. So thank you to people like you and all the work that you do and creating, again, this network of support. Tell us about how your work led you to the Transgender Law Center.
It's interesting. When I was in college and I became a college activist, I decided I wanted to work at the Gay and Lesbian Center in Chicago. And I did. That was my first job out of college, was working at what was Horizons Community Services. And I was their civil court advocate, staffing their 24-hour crisis line, which meant during non-business hours, I would carry around a beeper. Like, this is before cell phones.
Wow.
And so we would have a pager, and we'd get paged with the number and call people, and we would carry that and answer calls at like 3 in the morning. And a lot of horrific violence and discrimination, as well as the occasional middle of the night, where do I go to find a bar? Those drove me crazy. But I decided at the time that I set a goal for myself, and that I was really interested in becoming an executive director of an LGBT group. I got the bug for this movement, and I wanted to figure out how I could develop the skills needed to contribute in that way. And it was a circuitous route for me. I mean, it certainly was not easy. When I left that job to go to San Francisco, I did tons of different things. I was a mail boy before I was a boy. I worked, as a receptionist. I built databases. Like a lot of us, I did what I needed to do to survive, especially during my transition. I got a certificate in audio engineering and did sound for theater productions.
Wow.
So it took a little bit of time, but then when I came out as trans, it really re-inspired that as well. And I ended up going and getting my master's degree in social work at UCLA at the same time that I was doing FTM Alliance.
Wow.
And FTM Alliance was an incredible training ground because, we were working as volunteers to start a nonprofit, to figure out what's our mission, what's our strategies, what are our goals, how do we think change is going to happen. We had to implement that. We had to create logos and fundraise and get others excited about our vision and organize. What an incredible way to learn. The scale was small, right? I don't think our budget was ever more than $50,000 when I was there. But we made impact, right? We had an impact. And all of us, I think, who went through that learned a lot about nonprofit management, about organizing, about social change. So between that experience and my graduate school, experience in social work, I was able to get what I needed at United Way of Los Angeles, where I worked for 6 years as a grant maker and then a development director. And I just did that really. I'm proud of the work I did at United Way, but I really did it as a training ground. I wanted to learn so that I could be successful when I finally got the job I wanted. And so between the United Way experience where I was fundraising and learned a lot about that there, the fact that I was doing FTM Alliance at night and weekends, when the Transgender Law Center job came open, it seemed like a great way to combine those experiences and to finally realize that dream I had when I was 22 to be an executive director of a transgender group as it ended up. And so it was a good way to build on all these different experiences and bring them together. And FTM Alliance and Transgender Law Center had been partnering for a bit already, because Transgender Law Center also had been doing work around healthcare advocacy, and so did a partnership with FTM Alliance to create the Community Clinics Campaign, or C3, that worked on increasing, or just even creating, community health centers that would provide hormones and primary care for transgender people, because many of us were still having a problem finding a doctor, we couldn't get on hormones, and that was true for a lot of trans folk. So we had worked together to do advocacy around the LA Gay and Lesbian Center and BART, two places where they started to do more hormones, and that meant I'd known the Transgender Law Center and had relationships there. So when I found out their founder, Chris Daly, was leaving, I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and they were crazy enough to hire a non-attorney from LA to run a legal shop in San Francisco.
That's wonderful, Mason. Your evolution has been so inspiring and incredible. And I want you to tell us a little bit about your vision of the future. Transgender Law Center for you personally.
Great questions. We've come so far, but we still, we have not finished this journey, right? And especially when it comes to, for example, transgender people, especially trans women of color, the levels of violence and discrimination are still way too high. So we need to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. And I think there are a few things that we've got to do in the years to come. One is to figure out, how do we love ourselves more? Because there's still a lot of internalized transphobia, I think, that many of us carry around, and that is hard for us individually, but it's even harder in some ways collectively, because we're in a time where there are more and more groups evolving today than there were certainly 5 years ago. But there's a fair amount of infighting too, right? Because we're in the early generation of activists, right? Which just means many of us are carrying more scars than the next generation will. And we just have to be really aware of that and tend to those, because many of us have been hurt as we come out or live our lives, and that can play out in our organizations. So I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue in the next generation. So in my vision for the future, that's not going to be there in the same way, because folks won't be quite as beat up as many of our folks have been. One of the things I'm really proud of is we helped pass a bill, AB 1266, in the last year, the School Success and Opportunity Act. It's neat. It's just to make sure that trans kids in California in schools can, participate in activities and use facilities like bathrooms that match their gender identity. It's not that revolutionary, but it's the first time it's ever happened. And we are, we now are seeing this next generation of youth that are coming out younger ages. They're getting more support from their schools, more support from their families, and they're going to have a really different orientation to themselves as trans people, as adults, than those of us who came out later or struggled in a different kind of way. So I think more support for trans folk in general, a little bit less internalized stuff, more partnership and more cohesion in our community is definitely in the cards for us, but it's going to take just a little bit. And we've got a lot of work to do still to make sure that gender nonconforming people who don't fit into the binaries are also supported. A lot of our laws right now kind of assume a transgender narrative that is pretty binary. And that's probably going to continue for a bit. Still, the majority of Americans, 11% of Americans, don't know a transgender person, or they don't know they know a transgender person. So we've got to move that needle to build more public support. And so the public education is going to be really critical in the years ahead. And then figuring out how to, and at the same time, figuring out how do we broaden that narrative to be really inclusive of all of our multiple identities. And realizing that there aren't just two spots on that gender spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
So I think those are the critical pieces of work that we haven't finished. I think we need to address issues around prison and immigration, the fact that the street economy is still the one pathway that tends to be accessible to a lot of members of our community. How do we address that? And I'm excited to work with folks to try to find some answers to that in the years to come. For myself, I don't know. You know, I love this work, and I also believe it is a relay race, right? And that we need to be passing the baton too.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, I just hope to continue to serve in some way that will help the community, whatever I'm doing, and create pathways for other people to step up, because none of us who are leaders are really much different than anybody else. We've just shown up a lot and continue to do it and say, okay, I guess I'll do that. And we try to make it happen. You don't have to be the smartest or prettiest or richest to do that, you know? You just need to show up. And I'm really grateful for everybody who does.
Well, thank you, Masen, for showing up for yourself, for our community. Politically, you have really, I think, transformed the landscape for us and made it easier for that baton to be given. And I know that I definitely count you as a mentor,
Here's
somebody
the baton.
I aspire to be like and who inspires the work that I do. For that trans child who's going to be seeing this video at home, what message do you want to give them?
You're fabulous. You really are. You're beautiful and you are fabulous. You know, at the end of the day, this movement, and this would also go to the where do we go in the future, it's not just about trans people, it's about people. This is about being who we really are and creating a world where we can all be who we are and have what we need to survive and thrive. And don't give up on yourself or others around you. You're awesome.
Well, thank you, Masen, for living an authentic life, creating a space where we can all live authentic lives.
Thank you.
And thank you.